Usually, when you look at a ruined building, like an old medieval castle or maybe a collapsed cathedral, there's this expectation of finality.
Right. Yeah. Like it's just over.
Exactly. Gravity and time just, won the battle. You see the crumbling stones, the moss growing over the archways, the weeds pushing through the floorboards, and you just think, well, that's the end of that story.
Yeah, it's a monument to the past.
Right.
It's static.
Uh,
I mean, we like to look at ruins to feel a sense of history, right? To feel the weight of time. But we certainly don't expect those ruins to, like, suddenly start a conversation with us about our future.
No, not awful.
We don't expect them to be active.
But when you step into the historical and theological landscape of the biblical narrative, specifically looking at the concept of the temple, those ruins aren't just dead stones anymore.
No, they really aren't.
We're looking at a landscape of rubble that is, well, it's pulsing with tension and promise. And that's exactly what we're going to unpack in today's deep dive.
I'm really looking forward to this one.
Yeah, the materials we are exploring today are incredible. We've got this deep theological manuscript titled Rebuilding the Temple by Chris R. Velasquez.
It's a fantastic text.
It really is. And it's accompanied by these incredibly detailed historical infographics that map this whole timeline out. And there's a wild, earth-shattering claim being made across these sources.
Yeah. And it's not a small claim.
No. The claim is that the holy, infinite creator of the universe deeply desires to live among broken, messy people. And when the structure that facilitates that relationship falls apart, God doesn't just, abandon the site.
Right. He doesn't just walk away.
Exactly. He restores what his judgment has disciplined.
And that is a profound paradigm shift.
It really is.
The ruins are actually a prologue. When you look at this material, you realize we aren't just tracing the architectural history of a single physical location in the Middle East.
Right.
We are tracing the heartbeat of humanity's relationship with the divine, literally from the very beginning of time to the end of the cosmos.
Which is exactly why you, listening right now, should care about this ancient building project.
Absolutely.
Because every single generation, and including ours, asks the exact same fundamental question. What happens when the visible center of your spiritual or communal life is just, severely damaged?
Yeah, what do you do?
What do you do when the foundations you rely on are ruined by loss or moral compromise or just total collapse? And the answer provided here isn't to just go find a newer, shinier system.
No, it's much harder than that.
It is. The answer is found in the slow, gritty, agonizing work of rebuilding. And to help synthesize this massive timeline, we're talking Garden of Eden to the new creation, I am joined by our resident expert. You are going to be the perfect guide to help us navigate the mechanics of this monumental story.
Well, I am certainly looking forward to it. Because to really grasp the mechanics of how this works, we have to completely discard our modern Western conception of what a temple even is.
Oh, that's a good point. We definitely have a specific image in our heads.
Right, we tend to think of it as just a big church, a place where people go once a week for a religious service.
Community center with stained glass.
Exactly. But in the ancient world, and specifically in this narrative, a temple is, it's the control center of the universe.
The control center. I like that.
Yeah, it is the specific point of intersection where the realm of the divine and the realm of the human perfectly overlap.
Okay, let's unpack this from the very beginning. Because the timeline we are looking at makes a very bold claim right out of the gate.
It does.
It argues that the concept of the temple doesn't actually start with bricks and mortar. It starts with God's eternal purpose.
Right, before any physical material even existed.
Exactly. The timeline literally begins not with dirt, but with the word eternity, the desire of the Creator to dwell with a people. And then we move into creation, and this is where the text, it completely reoriented my understanding.
The Eden stuff is fascinating.
It is. Eden, the Garden of Eden, the text argues it was the first sanctuary. It was fundamentally temple-shaped.
It really was. If you look closely at the language of Genesis, it becomes undeniable.
Yeah.
Yeah, we usually picture Eden as this pristine botanical garden, right? A sort of flawless natural park.
Like a really nice nature reserve.
Right. But the ancient audience would have immediately recognized it as a temple complex.
Wait, really? Just from the description?
Absolutely. For example, temples in the ancient Near East were always situated on mountains or elevated places with a life-giving spring flowing out of them to water the surrounding lands.
Okay, and Genesis describes Eden exactly this way.
Precisely. But the linguistic connection is even stronger than the geography. The specific command given to Adam in Genesis 2.15 is to, quote, work and keep the garden.
Right, and the manuscript points out that those two specific Hebrew verbs are used later in the book of Numbers to describe the exact specific duties of the priests guarding the tabernacle.
Yes.
So Adam wasn't a landscaper.
No, not at all.
He was a priest.
He was the first priest in the first sanctuary. His job was to mediate the presence of God and guard the sacred space.
Wow.
And this matters immensely because it establishes the baseline. Creation was made for communion.
Right.
The natural state of the universe is for heaven and earth to be completely unified. There was no barrier, no separation.
God walked in the cool of the day in this space.
Exactly.
Ah.
So the temple is not some later invention of organized religion to control people. It is a historical attempt to recapture that original Edenic reality.
But that perfect overlap, it obviously doesn't last. We hit the rupture.
The fall.
Yeah, the fall. Humanity rebels, sin enters the picture, and that perfect fellowship is just broken. And the psychological reality of this is staggering. The text describes it as humanity now living east of Eden.
A permanent dislocation.
Yeah, it's a permanent dislocation. I was trying to imagine this, and it's like, imagine growing up in a home that was perfectly safe, perfectly warm, entirely yours, where you were known and loved completely.
Right.
And then one day, because of an irreversible, catastrophic mistake that you made, the locks are changed. You are pushed out the front door, and you have to look at your true home through a barred window from the freezing rain outside.
That is a brutal image.
But that's what it is, right? You are fundamentally exiled from the source of life.
It is, and that sense of cosmic homesickness, that is the driving force of the rest of human history. The presence of God is lost.
Right.
And that creates a massive, seemingly unsolvable problem for the rest of the narrative.
And here is where I actually struggled with the text progression a bit. I need to challenge this transition because the material jumps from this beautiful, pristine garden to the next major phase of God's presence.
The tabernacle.
Yes, the tabernacle at Mount Sinai. And visually, conceptually, that feels like a massive, terrifying downgrade to me.
Oh, it absolutely does.
We go from a lush garden where humans walk freely with God to this heavily guarded tent. It's surrounded by fire, thick smoke, strict rules, and frankly, a massive amount of animal slaughter.
Yeah, it's intense.
It is. So if God's goal is to dwell with his people again, why does it have to be so violent and restricted? How is a bloody tent an extension of a beautiful garden?
I get why that feels jarring. It is a jarring transition. But to understand it, we really have to understand the fundamental mechanics of holiness.
Okay.
We often conflate holiness with just being morally good, like a nice person.
Right, like a saintly figure.
Exactly. But in the biblical framework, holiness is a state of absolute intense purity and life. It is like the blazing energy of a star.
Okay.
It is beautiful and it is the source of all life, but it is also inherently dangerous to anything that is incompatible with it.
So because humanity is now corrupted by sin, which the text says is essentially decay and death, they're fundamentally incompatible with pure life.
Exactly. Think of it like a nuclear reactor.
A nuclear reactor?
Yeah, think about it. A nuclear reactor provides immense life-sustaining power for an entire city.
Right.
But you cannot just walk into the reactor core in your street clothes.
No, you'd die.
Right. If you do, the very power that sustains the city will destroy you. And not because the reactor is angry at you,
Right.
but because you are simply incompatible with that level of raw energy without protection.
Wow, okay.
So sinful humanity coming into direct, unfiltered contact with the pure holiness of God, they would be instantly vaporized by it.
So God can't just move back in with them like everything is normal.
He can't.
Yeah.
So the dilemma of the Old Testament is this. How does a holy God dwell among an unholy people without consuming them?
And the answer is the covenant facilitated by the tabernacle.
Exactly. When God tells Moses in Exodus 25:8, quote, "Let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell in their midst," unquote, he is essentially giving them the blueprints for a spiritual containment unit.
A spiritual containment unit. That makes so much sense.
Right. The tabernacle is a series of concentric zones of increasing holiness. It's designed to buffer the raw presence of God so you can live in the middle of their camp without destroying them.
That perfectly explains the architecture we see in the infographics. You've got the outer courtyard, then you go into the holy place, and then the deep core, the Holy of Holies, where the presence actually rested.
Yeah.
It's literal containment shielding.
Yes, exactly. And it explains all the sacrifices, too.
Right, the blood.
Yeah, the blood of the sacrifices wasn't about, appeasing a bloodthirsty deity. In their sacrificial system, blood represented life.
Okay.
It was a purifying agent. It acted as a spiritual decontaminant.
So the priests are essentially working in a hazardous environment.
Yes, the priests had to undergo rigorous washing, wear specific garments, which are essentially spiritual hazmat suits, and offer blood to cleanse the space so that the holy God could remain in contact with a sinful camp.
That's why they had the thick smoke, too.
Right. The thick smoke of the incense in the Holy of Holies was literally designed to obscure the high priest's vision.
So he wouldn't look directly at the raw glory of God and die. It's a mechanism of grace, then. The strictness, the rules, the barriers. They aren't God trying to keep people away. They are God engineering a highly specific way to safely remain close to them, despite their brokenness.
That's beautifully put.
It's a localized, highly regulated pocket of Eden right in the middle of a desert.
It is. It's a portable Sinai. And, this brings us to a crucial nuance about the Exodus itself that the manuscript points out.
Oh, right, the political aspect.
Yeah, we usually picture the Exodus narrative purely in political terms, don't we? Moses telling Pharaoh, let my people go so they could be free to live their own lives.
Make their own laws, exist without being slaves, just a standard liberation story.
Right, but the text we have makes a very specific correction to that. It emphasizes that the Exodus wasn't just freedom from Pharaoh's slavery, it was freedom for worship.
The full quote in the text is, let my people go, that they may serve me.
Yes, and this is a profound insight into human nature. The theology here assumes that humans are inherently worshiping creatures.
Like, we can't help it.
Right, we are liturgically wired. You are always going to center your life around something. You will always serve a master.
So if you just escape slavery but don't replace it with something true...
If you are liberated from the slavery of Pharaoh, but you don't immediately recenter your life and your community on the worship of the living God, you will inevitably just find another Pharaoh to serve.
Wow.
It might be wealth, it might be power, it might be an ideology, but you will build a temple to something.
That is incredibly clarifying. Liberation without worship is just a vacuum waiting to be filled by a new tyrant.
Exactly.
So the tabernacle wasn't just a place they visited on weekends. It was the gravitational center of their entirely new society.
Right. It organized everything.
It organized their calendar with the festivals. It organized their ethics. It literally organized the physical layout of their camp. The infographics show all the tribes camped in a massive square surrounding the tent.
Yes, the presence of God was physically in the center.
The public communal worship of God was the only thing keeping them truly free.
And they carry this portable, tent-like temple for generations, through the wilderness into the promised land, through the chaotic era of the judges.
Until we reach a massive turning point.
The kingdom era.
Right. The nation is consolidated under King David, and David looks around and basically realizes, I live in a beautiful palace of cedar, but the Ark of God still dwells in a tent.
Yeah, he feels bad about it. He wants to build a permanent house.
But God tells him no.
Right. God says you are a man of war. Your son, Solomon, whose name actually is derived from the word for peace, he will build the permanent house.
Which leads us to 1 Kings 8, the construction and dedication of Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. And the materials we have, they describe this as the absolute zenith of their architectural and national history.
Oh, it was a marvel.
It is a breathtaking structure. Gold, cedar, massive bronze pillars, intricate carvings of palm trees, and cherubim.
Which, if you notice, is all deliberately designed to evoke the imagery of the Garden of Eden.
The palm trees and cherubim, I didn't even put that together.
Yeah, it's a structural Eden.
And the dedication ceremony is overwhelming. The text records that when they brought the ark into the Holy of Holies, the glory of God filled the house in a dark, thick cloud.
The Shekinah glory.
Right. It was so intense, so physically palpable, that the priests literally could not stand up to perform their duties. The raw presence of God had taken up permanent residence in the center of their capital city.
It is the golden moment. God's presence is visibly, tangibly anchored in a permanent structure.
Yeah.
They have rest from their enemies. The cosmic control center is fully operational.
But here's where it gets really interesting. While reading the timeline, I noticed a very strange underlying anxiety in the middle of this glorious dedication.
Ah, yes. Solomon's prayer.
Right. Solomon prays this massive prayer of dedication over the temple, but it's not just a happy celebratory prayer. In the very moment of his greatest triumph, he is already anticipating the people sinning.
Yeah, it's looking ahead.
He is already talking about what to do when they inevitably break the covenant and are carried away into exile by their enemies. He prays, quote, "When they sin against you and you give them to an enemy, so that they are carried away captive, unquote.
It's pretty dark.
Why introduce that dark possibility at the ribbon-cutting ceremony? It's like bringing up a prenup at the wedding altar.
That is exactly what it's like. And the reason he does it is because Solomon understands a terrifying truth about human nature. And the narrative wants the reader to grasp it immediately.
Which is?
A static building cannot guarantee covenant fidelity. The temple is magnificent, yes, but the relationship it facilitates is incredibly fragile.
Yeah.
Having a massive golden building in your city is no substitute for actual obedience from the heart.
Because the visible structure can easily become an idol itself.
Exactly. It becomes a false source of security.
It's like thinking that just because you have a beautiful wedding ring, your marriage is indestructible even if you treat your spouse terribly.
Right.
The ring is just a symbol of the covenant. It can't enforce the covenant.
That is a perfect analogy. And unfortunately, Solomon's anxiety proves entirely prophetic. The historical timeline shows a tragic downward spiral following this high point.
Yeah, the kingdom splits in two.
Right, the northern and southern kingdoms. And the kings become increasingly corrupt. And the southern kingdom, Judah, where the temple is actually located, they persist in deep idolatry and horrific social injustice.
They start worshiping other gods, setting up idols right in the temple courts.
It's brazen.
They exploit the poor, they corrupt the justice system, and this is where the prophets step onto the stage.
The prosecuting attorneys.
Exactly. You have figures like Jeremiah who are essentially acting as God's prosecuting attorneys. Jeremiah stands at the gate of the temple and literally screams at the people.
He does.
He points out their hypocrisy, warning them that this beautiful building is not a magic shield. You can't just run into the temple, perform a religious ritual, chant the temple of the Lord like a magic spell, and then go right back out into the city to oppress the vulnerable and worship local fertility gods.
Ritual cannot protect a rebellious people.
Right.
The holiness of God is not something you can manipulate with architecture.
Right.
And this tragedy culminates in the visions of the prophet Ezekiel.
This part of the text gave me chills.
It is deeply unsettling. Ezekiel is given a devastating sensory vision of what is happening in the unseen spiritual realm.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So he looks at the temple, and he literally sees the glory of God. That same thick, overwhelming cloud that knocked the priests over in Solomon's day. He sees it lift up from the cherubim in the Holy of Holies.
It just lifts up.
It moves to the threshold of the door. Then it hovers over the courtyard, and then departs from the temple, goes out over the Mount of Olives, and vanishes.
Wow. The divine guest packs his bags and leaves the house.
That's exactly it. It's a chilling, terrifying image.
Yeah.
The nuclear reactor has been shut down.
The containment shielding is now just empty gold and wood.
Yes. And that spiritual reality immediately sets the stage for the physical catastrophe.
Yeah.
Because the glory has departed, the city is utterly defenseless.
Right. So in 586 BC, the Babylonian Empire, led by Nebuchadnezzar, sweeps in.
And it is brutal.
They sack Jerusalem, they slaughter the inhabitants, and they burn Solomon's beautiful temple completely to the ground.
They dismantle the bronze, they scrape off the gold, and they leave it as a smoldering heap of rubble.
And the surviving people are dragged away into exile, hundreds of miles away in Babylon. Now, the timeline makes it very clear how we're supposed to interpret this event.
Right. It's not just a military defeat.
Exactly. The 586 BC destruction is not just a geopolitical defeat. It's not just a matter of Babylon having better siege engines or a larger army. It is a profound theological judgment.
Yes.
God allowed the destruction of his own house because the people had completely defiled the covenant it represented. The visible sign of God's presence is gone. The physical building is reduced to ash.
And the people are enslaved in a foreign land. They're living in Babylon, surrounded by massive pagan ziggurats, feeling like their God has been utterly defeated by the God of the Babylonians.
It is rock bottom. It is the ultimate ruin.
It is the death of the covenant, as far as they can see. But, and this is crucial, as the source material beautifully emphasizes, judgment in the biblical narrative is never God's final word.
Never the final word.
Right. Judgment is severe, but it does not exhaust his grace. He disciplines, but he does not abandon.
So the physical building is gone, and the people are sitting in the dust of Babylon for 70 years.
Yeah, a long time.
The logical conclusion is that the story is over. But a theological plot twist happens.
A huge one.
God initiates a return, and he does it in the most unexpected way. The Babylonian Empire falls, and a Persian king named Cyrus takes over.
Right.
And Cyrus makes this unprecedented decree recorded in the first chapter of Ezra, allowing the Jewish exiles to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple.
It's an astonishing historical pivot.
It really is.
The text specifically highlights this as evidence of God's absolute sovereignty over the nations. God uses a pagan king, someone totally outside the covenant community, to initiate the restoration of his people and his house.
He moves the hearts of kings like water.
Exactly.
So a remnant of the people pack up and travel the long, dangerous road back to Jerusalem. But let's set the scene of what they actually walk into.
It wasn't pretty.
No, they don't walk into a neat construction site. They walk into total devastation. Decades of overgrowth, collapsed walls, massive stones that had been scavenged or thrown down into the valleys. The city is a wasteland.
A total ruin.
And the rebuilding begins, but it is slow, it is deeply contested by hostile local neighbors, and above all, it is incredibly messy emotionally. We talked earlier about ruins not just being dead stones.
Right.
These people had to physically dig through the rubble of their ancestors' failure.
The emotional complexity of this return is, well, it's one of the most profound aspects of the whole narrative. It's not a happy movie montage where they throw up a new building in a weekend.
With some upbeat music in the background?
No, not at all. It is grueling, traumatizing work.
There is a very specific moment the manuscript highlights that captures this perfectly. It's in Ezra chapter 3, verses 12 and 13.
I love this passage.
It's so powerful. They finally managed to clear enough rubble to lay the new foundation for the second temple. They hold a dedication ceremony. The priests blow the trumpets. They sing songs of praise.
Right.
And the text says that the younger generation, the people who had only ever known exile in Babylon, who were seeing a temple foundation for the very first time, they shout for joy.
Of course they do.
But the older generation, the elders who had survived the destruction 50 years earlier, who actually remembered the sheer scale, the gold, and the overwhelming glory of Solomon's original temple, they look at this much smaller, much more modest foundation, and they weep with a loud voice.
Yeah.
The sound of the joyful shouting and the agonizing weeping all blended together, and it could be heard from far away.
What's fascinating here is that moment perfectly captures the psychological reality of restoration in a broken world.
How so?
Well, restoration is rarely pure, unadulterated joy. Gratitude and grief are so deeply intertwined.
You're happy it's happening, but sad about what was lost.
Exactly. You are profoundly grateful that something new is beginning, that God is showing mercy, but you are acutely, painfully aware of the irreversible loss of what used to be. The new foundation is a sign of grace, but its smaller scale is a permanent, physical reminder of the severe consequences of their sin.
It's just so human. Now, navigating that kind of complex trauma and executing a massive rebuilding project wasn't a solo effort.
No, it took a team.
Looking at the detailed breakdown in our sources, there were several key leaders who drove this restoration. They functioned almost like a leadership squad, and they each faced distinct socio-political and spiritual challenges. We need to spend some time on each of them to understand how a ruined community actually gets rebuilt.
Let's do it.
Let's start with Ezra.
So Ezra is a fascinating figure. He is a scholar, a scribe, and a priest. And his primary contribution isn't logistical, it's intellectual and spiritual.
The timeline notes that Ezra, quote, brings the word, calls for repentance.
Right. You have to understand the trauma of the exile. When you lose your land, your king, and your temple, you lose your national identity. You forget who you are.
You just assimilate to survive.
Exactly. The people returning were highly assimilated into Babylonian culture. So Ezra realizes that if they just build a new stone temple, but have the same old, rebellious, assimilated minds, they will just end up right back in exile.
So he has to rebuild their internal identity before the external building can function.
Yes.
He brings the Torah, the law of Moses, and he reads it publicly for hours to remind them of their covenant, their history, and their obligations. He's rebuilding the software of the community.
That's a great way to put it, rebuilding the software. And then working alongside that, you have Nehemiah.
Nehemiah is the wall guy.
Right. If Ezra is the software, Nehemiah is dealing with the hardware and the firewalls. Nehemiah is the pragmatist, the administrator, the action guy. He arrives and realizes that the city walls are still in ruins.
And why is that a problem?
Because a temple in a city with no walls is completely defenseless against the hostile surrounding governors, men like Sanballat and Tobiah, who are actively trying to sabotage the project through political maneuvering and violent raids.
So Nehemiah's situation is incredibly tense geopolitically. The text notes that he leads with prayer, courage, and action.
Yeah, he's a deeply spiritual man, but he's also highly practical. He organizes the workers into shifts. He literally has people working on the wall with a trowel in one hand and a sword in the other.
A trowel and a sword, that's
He
intense.
institutes an alarm system. He refuses to let intimidation stop the work. He proves that spiritual restoration often requires intense, practical grit and physical courage.
And while Nehemiah is managing the external threats, the prophets are managing the internal despair.
Right, which brings us to Zechariah.
Okay, what's his role?
His role is to provide the spiritual fuel for laborers who are exhausted and discouraged by how small and insignificant their work seems. He's the one who delivers that famous line, "Not by might, nor by power, but by my spirit," says the Lord of hosts.
Why did they need to hear that specifically in that moment?
Because they were looking at their own resources.
Which were pretty scarce.
Exactly. They had no king, no army, very little money, and they were surrounded by enemies. If this rebuilding project relied on their own might or power, it was doomed.
Right.
Zechariah had to elevate their vision. He had to remind them that this physical, menial labor of laying stones was ultimately dependent on and backed by the invisible power of God. He gave them a cosmic vision to sustain their daily, grueling work.
Which brings us to the fourth major leader, Haggai. And Haggai, well, Haggai doesn't bring comfort.
No, he does not.
Haggai is the enforcer. He brings a severe, unapologetic reality check. We have to look closely at the situation in Haggai chapter 1 because it is so relevant.
It really is.
So the people had started building the temple, but they got discouraged by the opposition and the sheer difficulty of it, so they stopped. For years, the foundation of God's house just sat there, gathering dust and weeds.
Yes, abandoned.
Right. Instead of pushing through, the people pivoted. They focused all their energy on their own lives, their own careers, their own homes.
And Haggai looks around at this situation, and he issues a stinging rebuke. He says, "Is it a time for you yourselves to dwell in your paneled houses, while this house lies in ruins?"
Let me try to explain the spiritual mechanism of what Haggai is critiquing here, because it's not just about them having nice things.
Right, it goes deeper.
Imagine a community that relies entirely on a central water reservoir for its survival. But the reservoir's dam is crumbling, the water is leaking out, and a drought is imminent.
Okay, I'm with you.
Now, instead of the community banding together to repair the central reservoir, every single family takes their resources, hires private contractors, and builds luxury, gold-plated plumbing systems inside their own homes.
Oh, wow.
They have beautiful sinks and ornate bathtubs, but no water is going to flow through them because they let the source dry up.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it.
Yeah.
Haggai isn't just saying they are being selfish. He's pointing out a fundamental covenantal failure. In the biblical framework, there's a direct link between their worship and their ecology, their economy, and their flourishing. Haggai points out that their crops are failing, they're earning wages only to put them in a bag with holes, they're constantly unsatisfied.
Why?
Because they have neglected the center.
They prioritize their luxury plumbing over the communal reservoir.
Exactly. Disordered priorities produce spiritual and physical drought. Haggai is demanding that they recognize that true restoration requires a repentant heart and correctly ordered priorities.
You cannot prioritize your private comfort and expect the community or your own soul to thrive.
The center must be secured first.
So, chastened by Haggai's reality check, given cosmic hope by Zechariah, physically protected by Nehemiah's walls, and spiritually grounded by Ezra's teaching of the word, the community rallies.
They get back to work.
They do, and they finally finish the second temple. But as we mentioned with the weeping elders, there is a lingering shadow over this achievement. Even with all this massive effort, the historical timeline clearly states that the Second Temple was fundamentally incomplete.
He was missing something vital.
It lacked the visible, overwhelming glory of Solomon's era. The cloud of God's presence did not descend in the same visceral, undeniable way.
Right, and the Ark of the Covenant was gone lost in the destruction of 586 BC. So the Holy of Holies in the Second Temple was essentially an empty room.
Just an empty room.
It was a functioning temple, the sacrifices resumed, but it was a shadow of the former reality.
And that feeling of incompleteness, that tension, is where the sources pause the historical narrative to extract the core theological principles.
Because we need to understand what this all means.
Right. So what does this all mean? We walk through centuries of history, but what is the theology carved in stone here? If we look at the synthesis provided, there are several core takeaways from the Old Testament era before we move forward.
Okay, let's go through them.
The first principle is a vital corrective. Worship, not architecture.
This is the realization that the building only matters because the worship matters.
Right.
To rebuild the temple was not just a construction project. It was restoring the ordered life of worship. It recenters human life on the living God.
Right.
The architecture is merely the servant of the liturgy. If there's not, genuine surrender happening inside, the building is just a hollow shell.
Which leads right into the second principle. Holiness and mercy meet. We talked about the nuclear reactor analogy earlier.
Yes, the containment shielding.
The temple proves that access to God is not casual. You cannot wander into the Holy of Holies. It requires sacrifice, it requires a mediator, it requires blood.
But crucially, the temple proves that access is possible. Grace is literally built into the floor plan.
I love that. Built into the floor plan.
It is a regulated pathway to bring people in, not a fortress to keep them out.
And the third principle is the bedrock of the entire narrative. Covenant faithfulness. The very fact that God brought a rebellious people back from exile, softened the heart of a pagan king, and allowed the rebuilding of his house proves that God's faithfulness outlasts human failure. Exile was a severe discipline, but it was not the end. The ruins can be rebuilt.
The fourth principle is one I found deeply convicting, both psychologically and sociologically.
Which one is that?
Worship shapes identity. The manuscript states plainly, what the people adored shaped how they lived.
We become what we worship.
That is a fundamental law of human nature. The text points out the historical proof of this. When the temple worship was corrupted by idolatry, when he started worshiping gods of power, fertility, and wealth, the nation's ethics immediately collapsed.
Right. Injustice flourished, the poor were crushed.
Why? Because if you worship a god of power, you will become power hungry.
That makes total sense.
But when worship of the true, just, and merciful God was restored, the community's ethics were restored. Your allegiance, your memory, your desires, your treatment of others, they are all formed by whatever sits at the absolute center of your life.
Which is exactly why Haggai's rebuke mattered so much. If your own comfort is at the center, your identity becomes entirely selfish.
Exactly.
And then there's the final principle from this era, incomplete by design. We talked about how the Second Temple lacked the visible glory of Solomon's, how it had an empty Holy of Holies.
Right.
But the theological analysis here shifts the perspective entirely. That lack wasn't a flaw in the building project. It was a feature of the grand narrative.
Yes, the manuscript makes a crucial point here. Every restoration in the Old Testament is provisional. It is anticipatory.
It's pointing forward.
The physical temple, even at its best, was always a promise in stone. It was a rehearsal. It was a signpost pointing forward. The Second Temple's incompleteness, that aching lack of the glory cloud, was meant to keep the people longing.
To keep them hungry.
Exactly. It was meant to prevent them from settling for a stone building and to keep them waiting for the ultimate reality.
It was a cliffhanger waiting for a resolution. And that brings us to the seismic shift in our narrative. We leave the Old Testament behind, we cross the threshold into the first century, and we meet Jesus of Nazareth.
Here we go.
And this is where every single line, every symbol, every theme on our historical timeline converges. Everything we've discussed, Eden, the tabernacle, the consuming fire of holiness, Solomon's glory, the ruin, the Second Temple, it all funnels into one person.
It is an absolute convergence.
Mm-hmm.
And to understand the radical nature of what Jesus says and does, you really have to understand what the temple had become by the first century.
Right, because it wasn't that modest Second Temple anymore?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
King Herod had taken that modest Second Temple and expanded it into a massive, glittering architectural marvel of the ancient world. It was huge.
It dominated the skyline of Jerusalem.
It dominated everything. It was the center of Jewish identity, economics, and politics.
Which makes the scene in John chapter 2 so explosive.
Oh, yeah.
Jesus is standing in the courts of this massive, immovable stone institution. He looks around at the religious leaders, and he drops this absolute bombshell. He says, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up."
And they are flabbergasted.
I would be too.
They say, "It took 46 years to build this temple, and you will raise it up in 3 days."
But John, the narrator, clarifies, Jesus was speaking about the temple of his body.
Right.
For Jesus to stand in the shadow of Herod's masterpiece and say that he is the actual temple, I mean, that was borderline terrorism to the religious establishment.
It is an incredibly radical, dangerous claim. But the theological manuscript notes that this is not just a casual metaphor.
No.
No. Jesus is claiming to be the ultimate reality that the stone building only pointed toward for centuries. Remember the definition of the temple, the place where heaven and earth perfectly overlap.
Right.
Jesus is claiming that in his incarnation, In his physical body, the divine and the human are perfectly, inextricably fused. He is the ultimate control center. He's the embodiment of divine presence. He is the true sanctuary.
The sources say all temple symbolism finds its fulfillment in him. He is the high priest offering the sacrifice. He is the spotless sacrifice being offered to absorb the judgment of sin.
He is the holy place.
And this culminates in the crucifixion. The Gospels record a highly specific detail when Jesus dies on the cross.
The veil.
Yes, the veil. The massive veil inside the physical temple in Jerusalem, the thick, heavy curtain that functioned as the ultimate containment shield separating the Holy of Holies from the rest of the world, was miraculously torn in two, from top to bottom.
That tearing is the theological climax of the temple narrative. The barrier is gone.
The containment shield is broken.
Yes. The guarded presence we talked about in the tabernacle, the veil is rent. Because Jesus, the true sacrifice, has absorbed the penalty of sin, the pure holiness of God is no longer a lethal threat to those who are in him.
Wow.
Through his sacrifice, ultimate unfiltered access to God is granted. The physical building in Jerusalem has fulfilled its purpose. Its time is over.
But the story doesn't stop with Jesus' resurrection. The concept of the temple expands again, radically.
It does.
We move from the true temple to the living temple. The New Testament writers, specifically the apostles Paul and Peter, take this concept and blow it wide open.
They apply it to the church.
Right. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 3.16, addressing the community of believers, "Do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you?"
And Peter echoes this.
Yeah, Peter echoes this in 1 Peter 2, saying that believers themselves are being built up as a spiritual house, constructed of living stones.
Living stones.
So I have a logistical question for you on this.
Sure.
How does taking this massive, centralized, geographically locked stone institution in Jerusalem and turning it into a decentralized global network of living stones, how does that fundamentally change the nature of worship in the first century Roman Empire?
It is a total paradigm shift that turns the world upside down. First, worship becomes infinitely more intimate.
Because it's not geographically distant anymore.
Right. The Spirit of God doesn't just dwell in a building down the street. He literally indwells the believer. Your very life becomes sacred space.
That's a heavy thought.
It is. But simultaneously, worship becomes vastly more expansive and subversive. As the manuscript says, the presence of God is no longer localized in one city in the Middle East. It cannot be destroyed by a Roman army sieging Jerusalem.
Because it's everywhere.
It is anchored in Christ and sent out to the nations. The church itself, the community of believers, becomes the mobile temple. They carry the presence of God into every culture, every pagan city, every neighborhood, every workplace.
It's like the portable tabernacle in the wilderness again, but instead of one tent, it is multiplied by millions, infiltrating the entire globe.
Exactly. The presence of God is on the move.
And then we zoom all the way out to the very end of the timeline on our infographics. We reach the final reality.
The new creation.
A new creation, the book of Revelation, chapter 21. The Apostle John is given a vision of the end of history, the ultimate restored city of God descending to earth.
It's a beautiful passage.
He is describing its massive walls, its gates, its jewels, and then he notes something stunning, something that would have shocked an ancient reader.
Right, he says, I saw no temple in the city.
No temple. The building is completely gone. Why? Is it because the project failed?
No, it's missing because it finally succeeded. The temple is gone not because God is absent, but because God is fully, overwhelmingly, immediately present everywhere. For its temple is the Lord God the Almighty and the Lamb.
Wow.
The blueprint that started in the Garden of Eden is finally fully realized. The need for a symbolic mediator, a designated building, a separate holy space, a containment shield, that need is permanently over.
The entire renewed cosmos becomes the Holy of Holies.
Yes, heaven and earth are joined again, just like in Eden, but this time it's perfectly secure. There is no barrier, no veil, no unfinished restoration, no exile.
It is the ultimate cosmic happy ending to the story of the ruins.
It really is.
But we aren't in the new creation yet.
No, we are definitely not.
You, me, and everyone listening, we are living in the now. We are living in a world that still has plenty of rubble, plenty of trauma, and plenty of unfinished building projects.
Tons of rubble.
Which brings us to our final major section. Pitfalls and practicalities for today. Because if all of this is just ancient history or far-off eschatology, it doesn't help us navigate our lives tomorrow morning.
Right. Theology has to land somewhere.
Exactly. The sources are very careful to ground this massive theology in highly practical application.
Let's operationalize this theology. Let's start with the pitfalls. the common misunderstandings the text warns against. The first danger listed is treating the temple as a mere metaphor.
Just a symbol.
Right. Yes, it points to Jesus, and yes, it has deep spiritual meaning, but we cannot forget that it was real, gritty history. People bled, died, wept, and sweat over those physical stones in Jerusalem.
Because if you unmoor the theology from the actual historical reality, it just becomes a vague, floaty, spiritual idea. The physical reality matters because it proves that God doesn't just exist in the realm of ideas, he works in actual human history in real time, in real dirt and stone.
Exactly. Another major pitfall listed here is nostalgia, longing for the past instead of trusting God for the future.
Oh, this one is tough.
It is. This goes right back to those older folks weeping over the foundation in Ezra 3. It is incredibly easy to romanticize the good old days of your faith or the way your church used to be or the cultural power your community used to have.
And in doing so, you completely miss the new, modest thing God is building right in front of you.
Nostalgia can blind you to present grace.
That is a dangerous trap. And that ties directly into the next pitfall, form without heart.
Right.
This is the danger of focusing all your energy on rebuilding outward structures. Maybe it's church attendance, maybe it's religious programs, maybe it's just keeping up a moral appearance for your neighbors, while your inward heart remains corrupt, indifferent, or selfish.
Form over substance.
Yeah, God seeks worshipers in spirit and truth, not just people who know how to expertly lay spiritual gods to look good.
And the final pitfall is privatization, reducing worship to a purely private, inward feeling.
The me and Jesus mentality.
Treating your faith as just me and Jesus in my heart, and completely ignoring the corporate, communal, public nature of being a living stone. A single stone doesn't make a temple,
You have to be built together with others.
which requires friction, grace, and community.
So, avoiding those pitfalls, how do we actively apply this? The text gives us several direct implications for different areas of life. Let's talk about leadership first.
Okay?
If you are leading a community, a family, or an organization, the text brings up Haggai again. Leaders must ruthlessly guard the priorities of God's house over secondary, comfortable concerns.
It is incredibly easy for leadership to get distracted by building the institutional paneled houses.
Right. Focusing on comfort, branding, building a platform, or mere organizational management.
And completely forgetting that the core mission is fostering the actual presence of God among the people. Leaders have to ensure the reservoir isn't drying up while they argue about the plumbing.
What about personal holiness? This one hits very close to home.
It does.
If my physical body, as a believer, is a temple, that fundamentally changes how I view my actions in secret. The text has this brilliant phrase, holiness is not legalism, it is temple logic.
That phrase unlocks so much.
It really does.
If you actually believe that the Spirit of the living God dwells within you, that the nuclear reactor of divine holiness has taken up residence in your life, then your habits, your purity, what you look at on your phone, how you speak to your spouse, how you handle your money, it all has to honor that presence.
You wouldn't walk into a beautiful cathedral and throw garbage on the altar.
Exactly. Why would you pollute the living temple of your own mind and body? It elevates personal morality from just following a list of restrictive rules to honoring the divine guest.
Honoring the divine guest, that reframes the entire struggle with sin. It's about hospitality to the Holy Spirit.
Beautifully said.
And then there's an application here for suffering and discouragement. And I know many listeners might be in a season where they feel like they're standing in the rubble of their own lives.
It happens to all of us.
Maybe a career collapsed, a long-term relationship ended, a moral failure ruined your reputation, or a dream simply died. You are looking at ruins, and you feel like the glory days are permanently behind you.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of the Second Temple, the historical reality offers immense practical comfort.
How so?
The people building that Second Temple felt like their efforts were small, incomplete, and frankly, unimpressive compared to the past. They were just laying modest stones in the dirt. But the text reminds us, God does not despise modest rebuilding.
He does not demand that your restoration look as glamorous as your past.
He delights in the obedience of the rebuilding, not the impressive spectacle of the result.
So when you are putting your life back together, piece by piece,
Stone by stone, doing the next right thing in quiet obedience, God sees that as glorious. The scale of your success doesn't matter as much as the sincerity of your worship in the midst of the rubble.
that is incredibly freeing. You don't have to build a golden temple, you just have to lay the next stone. And finally, there is an application for mission. The restored people in Jerusalem weren't just meant to sit in their new temple, feel good about themselves, and pat each other on the back.
No, they were sent out to be a light to the nations.
The living stones of the church are meant to radiate that light outward into the darkest parts of the world.
Because the ultimate goal has always been, from Eden to the New Jerusalem, for the whole world to know and experience the presence of God. The temple is meant to expand until it covers the earth.
Which brings us to the end of our journey today. We have traced a grand cosmic arc, from the ruin of Eden to the redemption of the Exodus to the restoration of the Second Temple to the renewal in Christ, all the way to the final revelation of a world made entirely new.
It's an incredible story. The story of rebuilding the temple is ultimately the story of God's relentless, unstoppable desire to dwell with his people. He refuses to leave us in isolation. He will go to the cross. He will tear the veil. He will move empires just to close the distance between himself and us.
And that brings me to a final thought I want to leave directly with you, our listener. Something for you to mull over as you go about the rest of your week. We talked about this incredible paradigm-shifting concept of believers being living stones. If that is true, if we are indeed living stones being chipped, chiseled, shaped, and built into this ultimate cosmic temple, it completely changes how we view the ruin in our own lives. Think back to the ruined castle we talked about at the very beginning of this conversation. When the personal foundations of your life crumble, when things fall apart and you are left staring at the rubble of your carefully laid plans, your career, or your relationships, perhaps it isn't just a tragedy. Perhaps it is not the end of your story. Perhaps it is the painful, severe, divine clearing of the ground. God might be clearing away the weak foundations and the selfish, paneled houses of your own design, breaking them down to the bedrock, so that he can rebuild something within you that is finally truly capable of holding his presence. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the material. Keep seeking, keep questioning, and whatever stones you are currently facing in your own life, keep rebuilding. We'll see you next time.